Hello and welcome to the Outdoor Station, and the first in a series of interviews where we talk to athletes, adventurers, endurance racers and general outdoors people. Tonight I'm delighted to introduce to you Katie Jane Lerpiniere, otherwise known as Katie Jane Endurance. Now you may have heard the name, but if you need a little bit of reminder of who she is, this is the kind of thing that she's done. And that's Katie Jane Endurance, and welcome to the show, Katie. Lovely to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
You have a great experience and of doing a whole variety of endurance events, etc. But Iceland is something different for you. So how did Iceland come about?
Iceland came about because of a failed trip earlier this year, back in January. I ended up on a trip that I didn't really want to be on, doing something I didn't really want to do, which I didn't know till I got there. And I had basically set off on a 7-month journey to try and be the first person in the world to run across Europe. And after 6 days, I did the thing I've never done before, and that was quit. And kind of completely thrown me. I've never quitted on an expedition before. And yeah, got home and kind of had to really ask myself some big questions. Why on earth had I ended up where I was? You know, running down hard shoulders of dual carriageways on the Costa del Sol is a far cry from what really makes me tick. You know, I'm passionate about wild and remote places. So how did I end up on this trip? And yeah, I had to really figure things out. And by the end of figuring those things out, I just realized I needed just to go somewhere wild and be sure that I still really love it. Adventures, and it was just a blip, and it wasn't, you know, something telling me that this part of my life was over. And so I also at that point decided to do some qualifications, which I'm currently doing, will take a couple of years, but that was eating into my time and my budget. So I needed to go somewhere really wild and remote, but on a kind of, that wasn't too far away. I couldn't kind of go to far-flung places of the world, and it needed to kind of be a cheap short plane ride away. And I remember a good friend of mine, Al Humphreys, had said to me that Iceland was actually his favourite journey of all. Yeah, that's not too far away, and that's not too expensive a plane ride. And I looked into the middle of it, and it looks pretty wild and remote. So yeah, that's kind of how it came about. It really just ticked the boxes of what I was looking for. And I just wanted to go somewhere that was just a simple adventure for the pure pleasure of going on an adventure. No records, no world first, no racing people. I just wanted to go somewhere where I could just, me and my backpack, and look after myself on a primal level, you know, food, water, shelter, that kind of thing. That's what I love. And I just, yeah, wanted to get back to that. And Iceland was the place to go.
Well, that's a good start. But this isn't the normal type of adventures or endurance races that you're known for, is it?
Yeah, a lot of my other trips have been more kind of inadvertently ended up as a first, or, you know, I'm racing other people against the clock, or I'm trying to do a fast time. Yeah, they've always been a bit more about struggle, challenge, adversity, whereas Iceland definitely could be like that and throws in a few elements like that. But it was more just about the wilderness and just an adventure rather than putting myself through suffering and pain, which is what I normally do.
Okay, so the on your sort of experience there, the one that sort of fascinates me most of all, and we saw a bit in the video clip, was the Great Wall of China walk. I hadn't realised, or I assumed, because it's the only picture you ever see really, is the wall had been maintained for its full length. But obviously, walking its full length as you did, it was quite a different experience.
I too had thought the wall was going to be maintained when I came up with the idea of walking the Great Wall of China. I'd seen these, it was on my bucket list. You've seen photos of, wonders of the world, and I'd wanted to go and see it. And so I'd actually met a man, and one of his chat-up line was to ask me to walk him to the North Pole. He was a polar explorer, and obviously know what on earth would I want for, but over several months he convinced me that this was a really good thing. I really wanted to walk to the North Pole and I should join him, and I eventually agreed, but I said, maybe I should try something easier to start, because obviously this adventure world was completely new to me, and so at that point I suggested, why don't we walk the Great Wall of China? I honestly thought it would be a few weeks. I had no idea it was going to take 6 months, be 4,500 kilometers. Let alone no one had done the full west to east crossing. The picture that I had imagined would go and walk along, that postcard picture of the wall actually makes up maybe 1% of my journey. Most of it was either desert or mountains, and I probably only saw a wall of sorts for even 30% of the journey. And a lot of the time, unless you had a map actually showing you that it was, the wall, you just think it was a mound of gravel or something. So yeah, very different to what I expected, but utterly life-changing. I mean, I've been very fortunate to have gone to so many parts of the world, but nothing compares to walking across the Great Wall of China. Probably because it was my first. It was, as cliche as it sounds, it was life-changing. I cried pretty much every day, and became a different person at the end of it. So the people were incredible, the sights were incredible, the hardship was unbelievable, but I wouldn't change it for the world. It was the best thing I've ever done.
if anybody ever wants to read more detail about it, of course they can look over on your website, where you've got full stories on your blog there of some of the adventures that you've done, which makes for fascinating reading. I've been going through their cyber stalking you naturally, as one would do in a situation like this. Ready for the interview now, but of course the reason we're here tonight is to talk about the Iceland trip. Fascinating, and you became known to me via Dermot, who obviously you bumped into on, I presume it must have been your last day and his first. So I'm curious to know how your experience was and how it differed to him, certainly.
Poor Dermot. When I saw those pictures of his feet after just 2 days, I really still can't quite get over how they got so bad so quickly. I did suffer from a few feet problems along the way. I think his were due to the tarmac. For me, I suffered in the desert. The volcanic ash is incredibly sharp. It might look like a kind of grain of sand when you get little bits in your boots, but they're little knives. And I actually had lots of cuts all over the bottom of my feet and between my toes and things, mainly from crossing rivers. And you try and dry your feet the best you can, but the grit still gets in. So yeah, I did suffer for some sore feet, but not blisters in the way he did. So when I saw the pictures after I'd met him, I was, poor guy, but he'll be back next year, I'm sure, to finish the job. But yeah, I saw him on my second to last day, actually. But overall, I had just a fantastic journey. It was such a treat to go on a journey where I wasn't crying all the time and actually had a lovely time. It sounds crazy when you do adventures. You'd think it would all be fun, but it's type 2 fun I generally do, which means it's fun after it's finished. But Iceland was type 1 fun most of the time, which was a real pleasure. I think I had gone expecting it to be harder than it was. Not saying it was easy, but I think my expectations were the rivers were going to be worse. I mean, the weather in Iceland is not great. It's notoriously very, very windy and rainy, but I think I had a good run of weather for Iceland standards. Yeah, so it just went generally well. I don't have any near-death experiences, which makes a nice change, but doesn't make for such a good story, but it's a nice change for me. And I just had a lovely time. I generally haven't done many trips solo, and this one was solo, so I really relished the opportunity to do it on my own. And for 5 days, I didn't see a living thing, not even a bird, let alone a person to talk to. So yeah, really, really loved it. Couldn't recommend it highly enough. And the other great thing we can talk in more detail about, but I think if someone's looking for a remote and wild adventure, particularly if they're going solo, but perhaps are a little bit nervous, I think Iceland's a really safe place to go. Obviously, you still got to look after yourself in the environment against the elements, but got an amazing search and rescue team that were watching over me. Yeah, I just think it was a really good place to go and do a solo journey.
I was fascinated reading your blog post and your diary about it. Although there wasn't many people you met, but there was actually, it was interesting the number of people you met, and obviously they all spoke English. Were they Icelandic people, or were they Americans or tourists or what?
The people doing the traverse?
Yeah.
Yeah, not Icelandic. Whenever I met Icelandic people, they were completely flabbergasted by walking across the country. I'm sure some people have, but it didn't sound like many walk across the country. So I met Americans, Spanish, French, Italians. Yeah, a real mixture going down. That makes it sound like there were lots. There weren't that many. I probably met six people heading similar route to me, but north to south, and I was obviously going south to north. I think from my research, when I was researching the trip, there are a number of blogs out there which give lots of insightful information, lots of pictures and videos, which you can kind of really gather an impression of the place you're going to and help you choose your route. But there weren't that many blogs. So when I got out there and met, 6 or so people, that was more expected, considering, people could have started later or I could have missed them somehow. So yeah, I think it's a trip that is done more than I anticipated. It's not an actual route. It's not like the PCT or Appalachia Trail where there's a designed route, but it is something that seemingly every year a good handful to 10 people perhaps are doing it in one way or another.
So how difficult is it to get to your start point in the south there?
Nice and easy. So there's probably something to add here. So I didn't meet anyone else, and I haven't read about anyone else going from south to north. Everyone else goes north to south. The reason why I went the opposite way was actually because there is a section quite early on, my day 3 and 4, which is a famous trail in Iceland, and I knew it was going to get busy come July, so I wanted to get it done in June. I wanted to feel kind of as if I was in the wild and didn't want to see too many people. That was the only reason really I went from south to north, but it wasn't till I got to my finish line that I realized why everybody else goes north to south, and that is it is a lot easier to get. If you were finishing in the south, you're right there in public transport, there's a town, it's just much easier. So you finished your trip, you're tired, you've had enough, and you can kind of get back to the city, or you can get some accommodation. And that makes perfect sense, and that'll be why everyone else did it that way around. Whereas when you finish at the northernmost point of the island, there's nothing there. There is no public transport for at least 200 kilometers. And I was very lucky. I only walked about 15K before I was able to hitch a ride. But it could have been days. So unless you have a particular preference, north to south would probably be easier just from a logistics at the end point of view. But also at my start, I did originally plan to start at the true southernmost point, which is just a bit of black sand. But a film crew and some very evil birds prevented that. Normally I'd have been like freaking out and cross that my kind of detailed planning was going to pot, but on this particular trip, again, because I had no agenda, there was no kind of racing anyone or anything else, I just thought, okay, I will walk 25K to a new start point, which is the southernmost building, which is a lighthouse right on you know, it's a few meters different in, you know, distance down, but yeah, it wasn't officially the lowest point of the island, but on this instant, I didn't mind. I thought, okay, I want to start, you know, somewhere official. So the lighthouse seemed good. So I walked there. Pretty much everyone else finishes their journey anyway. So it worked out fine. But yeah, it took me 2 goes to start.
Well, I understood that there was some filming going on and where you were initially intending to start, which was a bit frustrating, I'm sure. But just to continue what you were saying about the actual where you finished, you obviously hadn't sort of researched or planned public transport from that point. But how did the people who started in North get there?
So they would have organised some form of taxi or drop-off service, whether it by friend or you know, paying somebody, but they would have actually organised some form of a lift, paid them, and got dropped off at the actual start point, which is easier to do pre-expedition than when you're tired and afterwards.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's actually look at the map and the route now, and start us off, as it were. I wonder if I can just drop the little man down here. What's as close as he gets is here, just to see what you were faced with. I've had a quick look at this, and it looks like the first day really was a lot of this type of road walking.
Yeah, so I was faced with a complete whiteout, so I didn't get the spectacular views at the start. I'm seeing more now on Google Earth than I saw in person. That's brilliant, isn't it? Yeah, it was. I actually ended up walking 50k on my first day, because I actually had to walk to get to the lighthouse as well. But it was dull. It was road walking. I was passing a million tourists doing, you know, their Iceland by vehicle. By midday, it was torrential rain, howling gales. And I was pretty unhappy, I have to say. It wasn't, you know, when you've come here to kind of resurrect your love for adventure after a disastrous adventure early in the year, it wasn't the first day that I'd hoped, and I was longing, you know, for it to be over and I could get in my tent. But by the time I got to where I was camping, you know, everything was wet. When I was setting up the tent, everything going in the tent was wet, and it was just a bit of a soggy start, but it got a whole lot better the next day, so I can't complain. It was just, I just had to get that road section out the way, and I knew it was going to be there, and I knew it was only going to get far more wild and beautiful from there on in.
Well, we've got a few pictures that we'll just run through while you're talking and set the scene, but as people can probably see straight away, it was a bit misty.
Bit misty.
But
apparently there's lots of lovely puffins at the start, but I didn't get to see them, sadly.
So that's another question, actually. The birds. Obviously, Dermot had a bit of a issue with terns, I think he said it was, and you had a different bird that attacked you. Is that right?
So at the start, well, my original start, I got attacked by, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, I'm sure, but skewer birds. They are massive, very, very big, strong built, kind of eagle-sized bird. They nest on the sand, so it's not like any birds were above my head. And before I knew it, they were just coming at head height, and they're notorious for just attacking your head until you sprint away. But they're big enough that they're definitely quite frightening. And so I had the film crew chasing me in a vehicle and the birds chasing me. I thought, it's not worth it. I'll start somewhere else. It's just an adventure. So I had those birds, and then I was attacked quite a lot by the terns up in the north. But Dermot had warned me about those, so I walked along with my poles above my head for many, many kilometers getting arm ache, but it was better than getting pecked.
So that was your first day, this route here. So I'm just trying to compare it to the Google Earth, and I think it looks like you went to the Skogafoss waterfall. Was that sort of area where you camped the first night?
Yeah, I camped right next to the waterfall. It was marvelous.
Let's see if we can see if we got a picture of it. See what it looks like in the better weather. And how did you find the camping? Obviously, we'll get into it a bit more. Oh yeah, I recognise the pictures of this now. I think you took a picture from down there, didn't you? Yes.
I did, yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
right.
you can
So,
see all the,
so is that a campsite?
yes.
Is it?
Yeah, so for the first one, two, for the first 3 nights, I stayed in designated camping areas because it's national park and you don't have any choice. So that actually kind of determined the mileage I could cover as well, because I knew, I had a few options to stay, but yeah, I couldn't truly wild camp, albeit they're not hugely luxurious campsites in the national park anyway. So it's kind of wild camping with others.
But the looking at the camping there, I assumed probably, and I don't know if you did when before you started, that it would be fairly open to wild camping. But are they pretty strict on it?
I don't believe wild camping is necessarily. I don't know the legalities, but I think I've read you're not supposed to wild camp anywhere in Iceland officially, because the moss and the grasses are so protected, because they're just getting eroded. So they definitely try and keep everyone together, particularly in touristy parts. Out in the Highlands, kind of from day 5 onwards, I mean, you would be allowed, because there is nothing else there. But probably a bit like France, it's the kind of place where you just set up, end of days and leave early in the day, and not hinder anybody's kind of view and things like that. Then I'm sure it's fine. But I don't think it's it's not like Scotland where you kind of free to camp where you like. But people do. I think particularly Iceland is massive for camper vans, and people camping in vans. So I think when they say no camping, they're probably who they're targeting, because there are so many people traveling in vehicles. Actually, if they all could stop wherever they wanted, there would be vehicles everywhere. There are less people wandering around with their little tents on their back, so I don't think they mind us too much.
So how long did it take you then, days-wise, to leave the crowds behind, or the tourists who are wandering around their camper vans, and get onto the snow peaks, as it were?
So I left the waterfall at Skogar, which is on a famous trail. It is, a marked route. I think I saw 2 people the whole day, so it's not hugely busy. And yeah, day 2, 3, and 4, there are no words. It was spectacular. There's a reason why it's a famous trail and one of the best walking trails anywhere in the world. I mean, within my 3 days, I saw everything from, as you're showing, volcanoes, glaciers, walking across snow, freezing waterfalls, boiling hot water bubbling out of the ground, lush vegetation. I mean, I can't get over quite how there can be that much landscape change in such a small space. But I would definitely say to anybody looking for perhaps a hiking holiday rather than an expedition, then to do those the first 3 days from Skoga to Porsmork is the first day, and then it's called I can't really pronounce it. What's it called? It's called the Langavega Trail. I'm sure I got that wrong, but it's very famous and mind-blowing, brilliant. You must go. So yeah, the first day I probably saw a couple of people, and then once I was on the more famous trail for the next 2 days, I passed maybe 30 or 40 people each day going the opposite way to me. So yeah, that's busier than I'd hoped, but not busy enough to ruin, my journey and not feel like I was out in the wilderness. And then when I left there, that was it. I definitely waved goodbye to civilization, and I had a moment of kind of, quite nervousness as I left that section on the middle of day 4. It was just the unknowns. I mean, I think it's a natural instinct in us all to just fear the unknown. And even though I was very prepared, I had all the right kit, and I, knew what I was doing theoretically, it's still, how deep are the rivers going to be? Am I going to get washed away? How bad are the storms going to be? Is my tent going to get destroyed? All these things do go through your mind. And I was just walking out of town, slightly emotional, and I say town, a hut, with the tourists, and I met a bike packer, and I instantly knew from all the kind of kit on his bike that he must have come across on the Iceland Traverse route. And so I stopped him and I said, have you just done the Traverse? And he said, yes. And I said, oh, can I pick your brains? And it was just brilliant to be able to ask him, you know, how deep the rivers were, what it was like out there, what did he experience? And he was able to give me a wealth of information. And then ironically, as we got chatting, found out that it was his first ever bike packing trip. And I thought, you know, Iceland was quite a test to do a solo bike packing trip for your first ever trip of any kind. And anyway, he ended up telling me that he'd got his bike packing list off this website, and it turned out it was my bike packing list that I'd put on my website, which was very ironic. So I helped him with his trip, and inadvertently he then ended up helping me put my mind at ease of what lay ahead. So that was a lovely little thing. And yeah, it was just really nice to know someone had come across and that all would be okay. So that put my mind at rest, and then I set off, properly into the unknown.
I noticed that the picture that just came up there was obviously one of the river crossings. And looking at your gear list, you had, I think you just took one pair of boots. I think they were Gore-Tex line boots. So what were you doing when you were doing the river crossings? Did you take the boots off? Because as you say, the sharp shards of gravel and grit there would obviously cause damage to them. So I'm curious to know what you did.
Yeah, so I took a little pair of swimming shoes. I don't know what they technically are. Little neoprene booty shoe things.
Oh, they're paddler shoes.
Yes, yeah. I bought the lightest pair I could possibly find on the market, and yeah, just slipped them on. Really, they were more to stop me slipping on the rocks more than anything. But yeah, would have helped against sharpness of the rocks. And there was no way I wanted my boots wet. My boots stayed dry for the entire journey, which was something I was dead set on happening. So yeah, boots were always off, tied around my neck. They smelt really bad, so it was. I'm never sure whether the crossing was worse because the water was so cold, or whether my nose was just too close to my boots. I'm not sure which was worse. But yes, the crossings were predominantly fine, other than, even when people say, you know, glacier water is cold, and I've been in glacier water before, it still takes your breath away at just how cold they are, and they always take a little bit longer to cross than you think. So yeah, it's a short pain window of crossing the rivers.
Great. Now the camping is going to be the one thing that I'm sure people want to know about. I know you approach this from a lightweight point of view, and also with your endurance experience in mind with your equipment. As I say, we'll come on to the equipment a bit later on. But from reading your blog and diary, you obviously struggled with the wind and the sharp grit, as it were, to find somewhere to actually get the tent stable and well, possibly sheltered as much as possible.
Yeah, so once I was kind of away from civilization and out into what they call the Highlands, in my head, I automatically, when I think of Highlands, I think of like lots of big mountains, but actually the Highlands in Iceland is desert, vast landscapes of kind of nothing. Like often I'd be walking on the same view for maybe 2 days, maybe more. You know, it really was vast open wilderness where nothing really changed. And so because it's so open, yeah, there was very little shelter, as it were. And I took a risk with my tent. I went ultralight, and as you say, we can talk about that in more detail later, but I was always trying to do my tent, give her a little bit of a helping hand by finding her some form of shelter, because she really was on the light side of the kind of winds we were talking. And sometimes I really struggled to find anywhere, but even if it was a tiny mound, kind of what would be maybe waist height when I was stood up, it was still going to offer something. So I'd kind of try and get behind there. And it was the volcanic ash, which makes up the desert, is similar to sand. You know, it really held little traction for my pegs and things. So I had to dig down deep, and I did have some sand pegs that I put in, but every day I then would head about finding stones. I say stones, they were just bits of molten lava, but you know, placing them around the edge of the tent to kind of wedge it down. So yeah, she held up brilliantly. Call her she, we're very good friends. She held up brilliantly, but it's definitely, you know, there were occasions when the tent is kind of flat over your face, the wind's blowing that strong, and you kind of just lay there with your fingers crossed, hoping it'll all be well. Maybe I worry more than I should, but that's because I've had a tent destroyed in a storm on the middle of the southern Patagonian ice cap, and I spent several days fighting for my life because of it. So maybe a little bit wary, but so whenever there's a really strong wind and the tent's laying flat across my face, I am kind of laid there with my fingers crossed. But yeah, it held up great, but shelter is an issue, putting in your pegs is an issue. Yeah, that's not what I can do though. I mean, sometimes I would walk on, you know, an extra 5 or more K to find somewhere better, but just have to take your chances sometimes. My feet can only go so far, so on certain days.
You mentioned the safety service, the safe travel system had sort of kept an eye on you. I'm just going to have a quick look at that now. Could you talk a bit about that, if you would?
Yeah, it's a fantastic service, and I really stumbled across it. I'm thrilled that I did, but it definitely didn't come. It wasn't as apparent as I kind of expected it to be for something so great. But it's obviously run by the search and rescue services. But what it is it's an informational website, so you can go on and you can see whether there's any hazards or warnings or road closures or anything problematic. Obviously, a lot of it is designed for people doing expeditions on vehicles, especially in the winter. You know, they're forever trying to get stuck vehicles out of places. But they have this great feature where you attach your travel plan. It's quite detailed. You put in every day where you expect to be, on what day, how long you're going to be there, that kind of thing. And then you send it in and they kind of acknowledge that they've got it. So you put all the data in, and then basically the services they're watching you. They know where you're going to be, and if you haven't got there, you know, for several days, then they're going to come looking for you. So it's great to know that kind of someone's looking out for you. They also have a little app that you put on your phone, and just with pressing a button once a day, that kind of gives them your GPS coordinates. So it's another way to tell them that you are where you said you were going to be. So I think it's fantastic. I've never come across another country with something like this. Maybe they do exist, but good on Iceland if not, because I think it gives you peace of mind. Obviously I didn't need it, but I'm sure there are people out there that might end up needing it. So yeah.
Well, yeah, the different road conditions. And how did you find it? Did you just stumble across it?
Literally stumbled across it, and I thanked them. You know, I sent an email actually afterwards thanking them, saying this is a really lovely service, and it's great to know that you're kind of there. But yeah, I heard about it easily, so promote it more.
Looking at the lakes there, were you tempted to do any wild swimming?
No. No, I don't know. Saying they're dirty is the wrong word. I'm sure they're not dirty, but they're very muddy coloured glacier lakes. They weren't crystal clear. That made me think, oh yes, I'd like to jump in there. And it also would have added extra walking, because none of them are as close as they look to the route. And I was not interested in doing extra walking in this point in particular. And thirdly, it was really cold. Albeit it was, you know, July. I wore pretty much every item of clothing I took with me all day, every day. Hoods up, goggles on. Yeah, there's no wild swimming happening.
That was something I was going to ask you, actually. I know you took the goggles and you took a face mask of some kind for dust or grit or whatever. Yeah. Did you used the goggles, obviously. Did you use the dust mask at all?
I didn't use the dust mask. I didn't, although it was really windy and I wore the goggles kind of at least half of the time. If a vehicle did come past, which was rare, but it happened enough that I wasn't ready. So it was best to have the goggles on, because they just kicked up so much dust, and the dust is effectively the grit. So in your eye, it would definitely, you know, scratch your eyes badly. The dust mask was more if I'd been caught in an actual sandstorm. I wasn't, but the bike packer guy that I mentioned to you that I met a few days before, he was in a dust storm for a couple of days and hadn't got a dust mask, and kind of was just burying his face in his jacket and things, and really struggled with it. So albeit it wasn't used, for the fact that it weighs a couple of grams, I would take it again. I have been caught in a dust storm on a trip before. Pretty unpleasant when you feel like you can't really breathe. So yeah, random bit of kit, but I would take it again. But the goggles, I'd highly recommend to anybody going to Iceland. I wore them from day one till the end.
So the dust mask then, was that some specific piece of skiing equipment or outdoor equipment, or was it just sort of like a builder's work DIY mask?
Yeah, just a builder's DIY mask. Yeah, nothing special. Got it in the supermarket.
So tell us about your daily routine then. What was the daily routine like?
It's a simple life out on the road. Because I wasn't doing any particular set mileage, or I didn't have to get particular places each day. It was quite relaxed. I didn't have a strict time I'd start, and I didn't have a strict time I'd finish. But in general, I would be walking by 7 a.m, mainly because it's been blowing a hoolie all night, so I'm awake anyway. It's 24-hour daylight, so I'm awake anyway. So yeah, my body clock just said it's easier just to be up and walking. I never was walking after that. A couple of times I was walking earlier, just because the storms were so bad. I just thought, it's easier to walk through it than lay here. But yeah, so 7 a.m. start. I'd usually walk a good couple of hours before I'd have breakfast. That's just a personal preference. I like to get moving before I eat something. And then I only had like 4 snack bars to last me through the day. I didn't actually have a lunch, so I didn't have kind of a proper lunch break, because if I did, then I'd probably get upset that I didn't have anything to eat in it. So I would just kind of have really few breaks. The longest break I'd have would usually be when it was warm enough to dry my tent. Most nights the tent outer has got wet, and then when I pack it up, it gets the inner wet. So I'd dry out my tent, and I'd just air my sleeping bag in case that had got condensation, moisture or anything. So they were 2 jobs I always had to do, and I always had to filter my water whenever I came across a stream, and that would take quite long. So I'd kind of make my breaks as and when there was something else to do, rather than have kind of designated breaks at certain times or anything like that. And yeah, generally walk probably till 6-ish in the evening, but again, no real schedule. Just by then, I'd usually had enough of walking and kind of covered a good distance, but nothing was set. I mean, my distances varied from kind of a 30k, kind of easy day, right up to 50k. But on average, I'd do about a marathon a day.
Just noticed you filtering some water then. Did you feel you had to filter the water, or was it a better idea to filter the water all the way through?
So there's 2 types of rivers. There were crystal clear rivers, which was just a natural river from a spring. It would probably absolutely fine to drink that. And if I hadn't have been practiced at always filtering my water, I'm sure everyone else did it, just drunk it straight from the stream. It was crystal clear. The Icelandics drink it. It would be fine. But I'm so used to filtering it, just because you've paid all this money to come on these trips. Just to get sick, I just don't think it's worth it for the few extra minutes it's going to take to put through my filter. So I'm just, yeah, I just filter my water. Whereas the other rivers, which are glacier rivers, are really cloudy looking. They're absolutely full of grit that's come off the glacier. Whether they have bugs in or not, questionable, but like the grit will make you sick. So yeah, if you drank probably even half a litre of that cloudy water, you would know about it. So but for me, it was just easier to do all my water. If I got water from somewhere and I was just boiling it straight for dinner, then I wouldn't, you know, if I was camped at a river and I was boiling it, then I wouldn't filter it if it was from a clear river. But
so how many hot meals did you have a day then?
One, just one.
Just the evening.
So I had a fire pot evening meal. Yeah, I have my food here. So I have one of these in the evening. Not sponsored by Fire Pot, but having tried pretty much every brand out there, personally, I think they're the one that tastes like real food. And they're a lovely brand with just great ethics. So yeah, so I had one hot meal, and then for breakfast I made my own these. So it's same amount of calories as in a fire pot meal, but it was just cheap to make your own. And then, yeah, just 4 snack bars kind of in the day, just a standard kind of, I don't know, a normal trekking bar snack. So I was pretty low on calories. I had just over 2,000 calories a day, whereas I was probably burning nearer 4,000. So I knew I was going to be in a calorie deficit throughout the journey. But it's a real balance of how much you're willing to carry to how much you're going to enjoy yourself, how much you're going to need the energy to be physically able to do it. Yeah, it's finding that kind of precious ground. And I knew with 2,000 calories, it wasn't going to make me feel, I was going to have enough energy to be able to do it. There are a few moments where I definitely would have liked more food, just more from a boredom point of view. Like if I had lots of snacks throughout the day, it's something to do, but I never felt like I'd run out of oomph from a lack of food. So I think I got the amount spot on. Yeah.
And did sorry to interrupt you, but you sort of said, I think you had about 5 days of solitude, not seeing anybody else. People are bound to ask, did you feel lonely, or did you feel grateful to have that peace and time to yourself?
I didn't feel lonely at all. I don't think it's long enough to have that loneliness feeling. And I'd gone on this trip solo kind of to get it. I really wanted to relish that feeling alone and feeling perfectly okay with being alone, and knowing that all my kind of other trips and my experience, I'd never really tested that whether my hang on, sorry, I'm not explaining that very well, but on other trips, although I feel like I have perhaps the skills to look after myself, you've always got someone else to kind of bounce an idea off, or say, yeah, should we go now, or should we call it a day here? So I really wanted to relish that opportunity to make those decisions myself and feel confident in making them, or seeing if I'd be confident in making them. And I felt completely at home on my own, and yeah, really relished those 5 days. I was quite excited to chat when I did meet someone. I'm quite a chatty person, so they were going to have to talk whether they liked it or not. They were getting away from it. But no, definitely no loneliness. There was quite good signal, and I had quite good power, and therefore I did have the opportunity to listen to podcasts and things like that, which I think is a good thing from the point of view of, you haven't got the opportunity to get lonely, there's things to listen to, but maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe I should have really given myself the test of just nothing, but I didn't. I thought I'd learn a few things along the way and listen to some cool podcasts.
All right, so you were listening to foreign languages and doing language skills or something. How to pronounce
Well, maybe not quite that.
Now, I want to know about this luxury accommodation that you booked into halfway along there.
I could just live there. It was wonderful. I don't know whether it was so wonderful because it was so needed on that particular day. I'd been in a horrific storm, the worst storm of the trip, the night before, and really everything was soaking wet. The wind had done a complete turn in the night and was hitting me side on, which then meant the tent walls were hitting each other, which then meant they were hitting the sleeping bag, and just everything was getting wet. And I was laying in my bed saying, do I go? Do I stay? I didn't really know, what decision to make. But I came to the conclusion that storms always sound worse in the tent, so just get up and go. But I knew that this hut was going to be an achievable distance if I got going. So yeah, set off across the desert to make it to this hut. And from the outside, it really is just a little tin shed that doesn't look particularly enticing at all. But I opened it up to what looks like a lovely little Scandinavian holiday home with everything I needed in it. And I was able to lay everything out and dry everything and just have a heavenly night's sleep after a disastrous one the night before.
So
and then woke up.
Is it like the Scottish body system?
Yes, it is. So there's an honesty box to leave money in there, and there was gas in there, and bits and pieces. There was a bit of rainwater in that blue barrel you can see in the photo, which is what I used because I was out of water by the time I got to there. So that was good. But yes, it's just effectively a bothy system, but they're expensive, I'm not going to lie. I mean, Iceland is notoriously expensive, and to stay in there, I think it was about £60 to stay in there, considering you're on your own, with nothing, doing everything yourself. I thought it was quite a lot, but then and there, I didn't care. I thought it was amazing.
So is it? I mean, did you have to book that then, or was it something you paid when you actually used it?
Yeah, you just when you use it, there's just a little envelope. You put your money in, and you write when you were there, and there's a little guest book, and you just pop it in a kind of a letterbox. Yeah, but there was really good facilities in there, so it's obviously kind of checked on by the rangers quite regularly. It was a really cared for hut. It was really clean. I think it could sleep about 12 people, so maybe in August it might see bigger groups coming through. When I was crossing through there, that desert was closed to vehicles, because there was still too much snow. But later on, I think vehicles are allowed to go through, and then you'd probably get more people using the huts.
So was there any particular night? I mean, that particular picture we're just looking at the moment, the tents there. Was there any particular night that the camping was fantastic and you enjoyed the process of camping rather than just using it as a shelter?
Oh yeah, that one actually was probably my favourite, because it was the first day that wasn't windy, and it actually, when I woke up, I had a really weird feeling. It was an eerie feeling, and I couldn't work out what it was. And it took me a good few minutes. I kind of had ringing in my ears and just this eerie silence it took me a little while to realize, there's no wind. I had not experienced no wind since I landed in Iceland, and hence my ears were ringing, because they were just used to the sound, and now there was no sound. But it was lovely. I could sit outside my tent, and I actually had breakfast there before I started moving, because it was just lovely. But quite a lot of the camping was fine. There were only a few nights that were really kind of monstrous, and I wished it to end. But overall, it was, it wasn't bad. I can't complain.
Well, I know this wasn't a speed challenge for you, and you did it for the reasons you described at the beginning there, more for the enjoyment and the pleasure of actually doing it. You talk with great enthusiasm about it. I'm assuming that you actually did enjoy the whole experience.
Yeah, I did. I'm trying to think. I didn't enjoy day one, and I didn't enjoy. Oh, I can't remember what day it was. Probably maybe day 7-ish. My feet were in bits. They were cut to pieces. But at that point, I hadn't really worked out what was causing them to be in so much pain, and I was kind of panicking a little bit that, is this going to stop me or something? And I was pretty low that day, and trying to cheer myself up, listening to music and things like that. But at that point, I was actually on an F road, which are these dirt gravel roads. Again, the road was closed to traffic, but I was able to follow this, so it didn't involve much concentration. And I'm walking along, my feet are hurting so much, and I'm so used to riding a bike for the last at least 5 years of my life has been very bike related, that I just couldn't get out of my head the stupid thoughts of why I hadn't bought my bike. Like, what was I thinking? Why was I walking across this country when it would make a great bike packing adventure? And I was just eating away at myself that I'd made the wrong decision. But other than those 2 days, it really was pleasurable. And I had a lovely time, and to the point that actually when I phoned home to my boyfriend and to my mum, they'd often say, "Oh, we're so pleased that you sound jolly and like you're having a nice time," with a real shock in their voice, because they're so not used to it. They were like, "This is great that you're having a nice time." But yeah, it was great, and it was easy. It is a chat. I just had come expecting it to perhaps be more challenging, and perhaps compared to some of my other trips, which were horrendously death-defying, in comparison felt a little easier. And that, in hindsight, over the years, I've learned to get quite good at suffering and being uncomfortable. So actually now this level of uncomfortable felt quite comfortable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think when you've been through the experiences that you have, then all of a sudden, what would be uncomfortable for most people, you think is a walk in the park. It's very difficult,
Yeah,
isn't it?
that. Yeah. My partner gets cross if I ever use the term easy, because he's like, it's not easy. It's just, it was easier than some of the other things you've done. So, don't give a false impression of it. No, I was, I have to remember I was still doing kind of a marathon a day, with 23 kilos on my back. So, it still was a physical endurance challenge, that's, which is what I love. That's why I went there, to do it. But it was just a really cool country with such really cool stuff to look at that I will never see anywhere else in the world. I mean, walking through the biggest lava desert in the world, which was my central bit in the Highlands, where I saw no one for 5 days. I mean, it really was like walking through the Lord of the Rings Mordor set. I mean, yeah, to say it was lunar is kind of an understatement. It's just a fascinating place, and you can see why. It's where they did the Apollo moon mission testing there. It needs to be seen to be believed, really.
Well, you've mentioned equipment and the rucksack weight in particular, so we'll come on to that now. I think the base weight of your rucksack was a very, very successful 10K, and the rest of it was food.
Yeah, I love kit. And as you can see on the screen from my Excel spreadsheet, I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to kit and weight and things like that. Predominantly because I've done so many trips where weight really is a key factor to making or breaking the trip. On this trip, there would have been probably lots of people that carried a lot more weight than me and took more time and had more food, and perhaps enjoyed it even more than I did. But I decided to carry less weight and move across the ground quicker. That was, the kind of balance point that I decided to make. And to get enough food meant the kit really had to be as light as possible, so that I could stock up with more food. And yeah, so my favourite bit of kit is,
well, that's going to be my next question. Yes, good bits and bad bits.
Yeah, so my little Nordis tent. I'm not. I'm going to be honest and say it did cost me a lot of money for this little bag, but I adore it, and it's come all sorts of places all over the world with me. It weighs, I think it weighs 575 grams or something. It's a 2-man double skin tent. I'm not into bivvying. That's just my thing. I like to have a zip and keep creepy crawlies away from me, even though there weren't any in Iceland. But it's just, yeah, I'm not good with creepy crawlies, so I like a tent. So this is pretty much as light as you can go when it comes to actually a proper tent. I did change the pegs out for something a bit more. This is a sand tent peg, which is actually almost as long as the tent in the bag. So the little tent pegs that it comes with just wouldn't have held up in the kind of sandy volcanic ash. So I did change them for those. But yeah, great little tent. And if I had brought the other tent that I had got, it would have been an extra 1 and a bit kilos. So yeah, it was
I noticed
it was a good choice.
When I went through your diary, you actually said that you obviously were in the tent and you had the sleeping system, but you also were inside a bivvy as well.
Yes. So that was, I thought the weather was going to be worse than it was. I was not, like, if I hadn't have seen the sun for the entire journey, I wouldn't have been surprised. That's kind of what I expected it to be. And therefore I didn't think I'd have the opportunity to necessarily do a sleeping bag if it got damp, or, if the tent is so small that if you had really bad weather, which I did on the odd occasion, the outer might have touched the inner and touched the sleeping bag, and my bottom of my sleeping bag might have got wet around my feet. I don't sleep well if I have cold feet, which is why I also take as my luxury item little down booties. But yes, I took a really ultralight bivvy just so I knew my sleeping bag was going to stay dry all the time, just in case I didn't dry it or didn't have the chance to dry it. That was it. Probably would have been fine without the bivvy, but yeah, that's why I took it.
I'm just curious that you didn't have any problems with condensations inside the bivvy, inside the tent, due to the weather anyway. Everything was fine from that point of view?
I think it was too windy.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think the wind kept everything moving, which really helps with obviously the
Yeah.
condensation. If it had been a dry, still night, perhaps. I've actually never really had too many problems with condensation in that tent, and I've been in all sorts of conditions in it. But yeah, the wind definitely helps. The bivvy also adds an extra warmth layer. I feel the cold. I take Nalgene bottles and I make them into hot water bottles at night and put them in my sleeping bag. So I had 2 hot water bottles most nights as well as my good sleeping bag, and then a bivvy bag, little down booties on. Yeah.
So the only things missing is the cuddly toy.
Yeah, I did take a little one of those. I took my little squishy charm. But yeah, any old fool can be cold. So I pack for.
And so what about any equipment that didn't quite work out as well as you'd hoped, or you thought you could have replaced with something else?
No, I was really happy with every bit of kit I took. I wouldn't change a thing if I was to go again. The only thing that my camera broke. That was just unfortunate. If I was going again, I'd take the same camera and hopefully it wouldn't break, but it broke right at the start. So I took all my photos on my mobile. But because I wasn't having to recharge the camera as well as my mobile, I actually didn't get through my power as much as I thought. So I probably could have done without my solar panel. I took a really big power block, which stores lots of power, and yeah, it probably would have lasted. I could have topped it up. There was one little town I went through with about 5 days from the end where I could have recharged it, and that would have saved weight on the solar panel. I wasn't to know that. Would I take it again? Would I not? I'd think on that one, but not because it didn't do a good job, just probably didn't get enough use for the weight.
But looking at the experience that you had with the location, as it were, the environment generally, and you obviously had the right gear for that sort of weather, if the weather had been as bad as you were anticipating, or anticipating it could have been much worse, were you happy with everything that you had with you that would have been right for the job?
Yeah, so like I was wearing pretty much all my wet weather clothing all the time, but purely just as a windbreak more than anything else. And I'm sure it would have done well. I met a couple of people who didn't have the right gloves. You know, they got hit with a snowstorm and, you know, didn't have proper insulated gloves. I had all of those bits and pieces and didn't really use them. So without sounding arrogant, I do think I had the right kit for the job, and even if I'd had worse weather, I think it would have all done good. We won't know, probably.
I'll just drop a picture in there and see what the scenery looks like when we get towards the end there. So finally, then, there's always a good question which I like to check in, which usually throws people slightly. So we'll see what you would say when you come up with this one. But of all the things I could have asked you about the actual experience and the trip itself, what should I have asked you?
You're right. That's a hard one. What should you have asked me? I don't know an answer to it. I think we've been through quite a lot of things.
That's okay. It's a low ball question. It's always interesting to see what people say. Katie, all I want to say really is thank you very much indeed. This has been the first video interview that we've done on the Outdoor Station. The quality has been coming and going where you are, but I'm glad to say everything has come through clearly. So thank you very much indeed for your time. I'm sure many people will be interested in the trip itself. Of course, they can actually go to your website, which is katiejaneendurance.com. And there is plenty of information there about you, the range of experiences you've had, and also obviously in your blogs you've done a series of diaries of all the things that you have done over the years, which is makes for fascinating reading. So thank you once again, and hopefully we'll catch up with you soon on your next expedition, which may be what? Do you know? Have you thought of anything yet?
I don't have an actual kind of big expedition planned as yet, mainly because I'm going through the mountain leader and international mountain leader qualifications at the moment, which are taking up quite a lot of my time and money. But I think next year I am to Azerbaijan and Georgia on a little bike packing trip. But it will be, again, a pure adventure. There's no kind of major goal to it, just going with my partner to enjoy a new part of the world.